She was a grim widow who shut out the world after her husband's death, until a mysterious black cowboy rode into her quiet town, carrying more silence than words. What began as distance grew into something neither of them saw coming, a true story of healing through unexpected love. The fog hung low over the cemetery, settling like a heavy breath over the headstones. Eleanor Briggs stood in her black wool coat, one hand clutching a worn umbrella, the other resting on the cold marble of her husband's grave. The November air stung her cheeks, but she welcomed the discomfort. At least it reminded her she was still here. Leaves, brittle and brown, scattered at her feet like memories she no longer had the energy to gather. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The townsfolk said it was understandable. Grief took time. But Eleanor knew they also pitied her. In a town as small as Bramble Creek, silence wasn't solitude. It was spectacle, and she was the lead act. From a distance, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. She turned slightly. A lone cowboy passed on horseback, his face half-shadowed beneath the brim of a wide brown hat. He didn't look her way. He didn't need to. Something about his presence cut through the fog with more force than sunlight ever could. "You don't have to visit every day," Claire said softly, her voice pulling Eleanor back to the moment. "It's the only time I feel alive," Eleanor replied, her voice even. Claire adjusted her scarf. "There are other ways to live, you know." But Eleanor wasn't listening. Her eyes followed the last echo of hoofbeats, fading into the grey morning. "Hello, my Stop Racism family. Thank you for tuning in today. Before we dive deeper into the story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments below. Also, I'd love to know your thoughts. What did you think of the story so far? Let us know in the comments. We love reading them. And trust me, your words motivate us to keep making these videos. Let's make this video reach at least 50 comments. Your support means the world to us, and it drives us to create even more meaningful content for you. So don't forget to comment, share, and keep the positivity flowing. The town gathering had always been a quiet affair. Coffee brewed too strong, pies made too sweet, and conversations laced with the kind of politeness that didn't always come from the heart. Inside the mayor's office, now turned makeshift hall, wooden walls gleamed with the reflection of yellow overhead lights. The scent of apple cinnamon and roasted pecans drifted across the room. Paper name tags clung awkwardly to wool coats, and folding chairs creaked under shifting bodies. Children buzzed underfoot, while older women stood near the pie table, exchanging stories of church events and weather complaints. Eleanor sat alone near the back, her arms folded across her chest. She hadn't touched the peach cobbler Claire insisted she try. Her gaze wandered the room, but her mind stayed locked in the past. These people had continued laughing, baking, and growing old without skipping a beat. Meanwhile, she still woke in a bed that smelled of loss. Then the door opened with a quiet groan and the air seemed to shift. He walked in slowly, dark coat, dusted boots, broad shoulders that filled the frame. He wasn't looking for attention, and yet it found him. His hat remained on, shadowing his face, but she caught a glimpse of his eyes. Steady, unbothered. Not searching, just arriving. Claire leaned closer, whispering near Eleanor's ear. "That's Samuel. He's been working out at Jenkins Ranch. Came in just last week." Eleanor didn't blink. Another outsider. Maybe, but he's polite. Keeps to himself. They all do, until they don't. Claire studied her sister's face. "He's not like the others. You sound like you know him." "I don't, but sometimes you can feel when someone carries weight, like you." Eleanor's eyes remained on Samuel. He had made his way to the far table, accepting a small plate of cornbread from an elderly woman. He said something she couldn't hear, but the woman smiled, placing a hand on his arm before drifting away. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Claire sighed. "You could at least pretend you're open to something new." "Open?" Eleanor snapped, her voice low. "Open is what got me hurt. Open is what put me in a dress made of grief." Claire shook her head but didn't push further. Instead, she followed Eleanor's gaze across the room, both of them watching the man who didn't belong and didn't seem to care. Samuel leaned against the back wall, his plate untouched. He looked at no one, yet made no effort to hide. He was still, not hiding, just being, the way a tree might stand in the middle of a storm, letting it pass over without breaking. Eleanor shifted in her seat. "I've seen men like him." "No," Claire said quietly. "You've seen men who pretend to be like him." Eleanor didn't reply. The conversations carried on. Pies were cut. Laughter rose like wind. But in Eleanor's corner of the room, something had changed. Not loudly, not even visibly, but deeply. A presence had arrived, and for the first time in months, Eleanor noticed something other than her pain. She noticed him. The porch light flickered like it couldn't decide if the darkness should win. A slow wind rustled the edge of the trees lining the back of Eleanor's yard. Her scarf, the old one with the embroidered edge, had torn from the hook earlier and drifted off like it had somewhere better to be. She hadn't bothered chasing it. What use was there? Things slipped away. That's just what they did. Then came the sound of hooves against dirt. Slow, steady. Not the hurried kind meant to impress, but a calm rhythm that settled into the evening like it belonged. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, arms folded against the chill. A man approached. Tall in the saddle, broad shoulders outlined beneath a pricey dark coat. His horse snorted once, then stopped near the gate. Samuel dismounted without a word, holding the scarf gently in one hand, as if it might unravel from breath alone. "You dropped this," he said, his voice even, quiet. She blinked, caught off guard. "It flew off." "I saw," he said, stepping closer but keeping to the other side of the fence. Eleanor reached for it slowly. Their fingers didn't touch, but the closeness made her throat tighten. "Most people wouldn't bother." "I'm not most people." She nodded, unsure of what to say. The scarf felt warmer than it should, as if it had soaked up something from him on the ride back. "You're the new hand at Jenkins," she said finally. He nodded once. "Samuel Reed." "I know who you are," she said. "My sister can't stop talking about you." "She seems kind," he replied. "You do too." "I'm not." He tilted his head, a faint trace of a smile threatening the corner of his mouth. "Not yet, maybe." She scoffed, then looked down at the scarf. "You always talk like that, like you're quoting a book." "I don't read much," he said, "but I've lived a bit." She leaned against the railing, the wood pressing into her back. "Where from?" "Everywhere," he answered. "Nowhere." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." There was no offense in his tone, just a simplicity that made her feel exposed. He wasn't looking at her like a man usually did. Not the way they used to when her husband was still alive, not the way they tried to after he was gone. He looked at her like she was a moment, not a challenge. "You don't smile much," he observed. I forgot how. He didn't laugh, didn't comfort, just nodded. "I should get back," she said. The scarf still clutched in her hand like something precious. "All right." He turned to leave, but before mounting his horse, he added without turning, "Some things blow away for a reason." But that one came back. She didn't reply. Couldn't. When he rode off, dust rose behind him, in a soft curl. The porch light flickered again but didn't go out. Eleanor stood there long after he disappeared, holding a piece of cloth that suddenly felt like a question she wasn't ready to answer. The dinner table glowed with soft candlelight, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. The scent of rosemary chicken lingered in the air, warm bread rested in a cloth-lined basket, and the clink of silverware rang sharper than the laughter meant to soften it. Claire's small dining room had never felt this full, yet the silence around the table could have swallowed the room whole. Samuel sat quietly at the far end, posture straight, eyes calm, not pretending to belong. Eleanor sat across from him, her fork moving mechanically, her appetite nowhere to be found. She'd protested earlier. She'd told Claire this wasn't necessary, that it would only make things worse. But Claire had insisted, saying it was just a meal, just food and faces and warmth. Eleanor knew better. In a town like theirs, nothing was just anything. Every seat filled had a meaning, every glance a weight. She saw it clearly now. The pause when Samuel entered, the way Mrs. Tanner's laugh cut short, the slight stiffening of Mr. Ford's shoulders. They hadn't said anything. That was the worst part. The quiet judgment lingered in the air like smoke. Eleanor pushed her plate away and leaned toward Claire, voice low. "This was a mistake," Claire arched a brow. "Because he's here? Because he doesn't belong here." Claire looked across the table at Samuel, then back. "Maybe. Neither do we sometimes." Eleanor scoffed, taking her napkin and folding it into sharp, agitated corners. "You don't get to say that. You didn't grow up trying to maintain everything our family built." "No," Claire replied. "I grew up watching you carry it like a stone on your back." Eleanor's voice lowered further. "What do you want me to say? That he's different? That he's worthy of a seat at this table?" "I want you to stop looking at him like he's a storm," Claire whispered. "He hasn't broken anything." Eleanor stood abruptly. The room went silent, all eyes darting toward her. She forced a smile, one that cracked at the edges, and excused herself. Later, as the dinner ended and chairs scraped gently against hardwood, Samuel stepped outside. The evening had turned cool. He leaned against the porch railing, watching the stars. Eleanor joined him, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. She didn't speak first. He did. Thanks for the meal. It wasn't mine to offer, she said. He nodded slowly. Still, thank you. They stood in silence, the porch boards creaking beneath shifting weight. Finally, she broke it. You know what they're thinking, she said. I don't have to know, he replied. I've lived it. She glanced sideways at him. Then why come? Because someone asked, and I don't run from rooms just because they aren't made for me. She stared at the horizon. You don't belong here. He didn't flinch. Neither do I. That answer stung more than any argument could have. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry. It was just true. She saw it in the way he held his shoulders, not braced for insult, but simply worn from carrying them. I didn't want you at that table, she confessed. I know. But I didn't leave either, she added. He looked at her now, fully. Why not? She swallowed hard. I think because part of me didn't want to watch you leave. He offered nothing more than a nod. But that nod was louder than the clinking forks, louder than Claire's soft encouragement, louder than the voices in her head telling her who she was supposed to be. The stars blinked above, indifferent and brilliant. She stayed a little longer this time. How's this story hitting you so far? Tell us in the comments. If you're loving it, type 1. If not, type 0. We want to know what you think. The barn was quiet except for the low murmur of wind against its wooden slats. A thin veil of moonlight spilled through the high windows, casting long shadows across the hay-covered floor. The scent of dust and earth lingered, mixed with the warm, living smell of animals. Samuel knelt beside a trembling foal, its leg wrapped in a makeshift bandage. A lantern flickered beside him, softening the hard lines of his face. He hummed, low under his breath, not loud enough to be a song, just enough to soothe. Eleanor had come looking for Walter, not him, but she stopped in the doorway, unnoticed, watching the man she still didn't understand. The way he moved wasn't hurried. It was careful, measured, kind. She stepped forward, slow enough not to startle the animal, or herself. You're good with broken things, she said, her voice quieter than she expected. Samuel looked up, but didn't smile. He didn't need to. I've had practice, he said. She approached and knelt down beside him, her hand hovering before touching the foal's damp neck. The animal shivered but didn't pull away. What happened? She asked. Stepped into a rut out near the ridge, he answered. She panicked, hurt herself worse trying to run. Eleanor nodded slowly. She's lucky you found her. I reckon I was the only one listening. They worked in silence for a while, Eleanor handing him strips of gauze, holding the lantern steady while he adjusted the wrap. You talked to them? She said after a while. Not just them, he replied. But they listen better than most. She let out something close to a laugh, soft and surprised. That's probably true. He paused, looked at her. You ever spend time in a barn before? My husband raised show horses, she said. But I never came out here after we lost him. It was his world. He nodded. Now it's quiet. She looked around. Now it's full of ghosts. Samuel dipped the cloth in the bucket and wrung it out. Sometimes ghosts ain't trying to haunt you. Sometimes they're just waiting to be seen. Eleanor went still. Her throat caught on something she wasn't ready to name. You speak like a preacher, she said. No, he said gently. I speak like a man who lost people. She turned away, blinking fast. It doesn't get easier. No, he agreed, but it gets clearer. They finished wrapping the foal's leg and sat back on their heels. The barn had settled into its usual sounds, the rustle of straw, the occasional stomp of a horse in its stall. You saved her, she said finally. I didn't save her, he said. I just stayed when it mattered. Eleanor stood up slowly, brushing off her knees. That's more than most. Samuel followed, his body unfolding in one long, graceful movement. You didn't have to stay either, he said. I didn't mean to, she admitted. But something told me not to walk away. They stood beside each other in the dim light, the distance between them no longer edged with hostility, but with something else, something careful, like a bridge being built one board at a time. Don't think I know who I am without my grief, she whispered. Samuel's voice was quiet. That means you're still in it, not broken, just living. She exhaled a shaky breath. You make it sound so simple. It ain't simple, he said. It's just true. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The foal shifted its weight and let out a soft sigh. Eleanor looked at the creature, then back at him. "Will she walk again?" "I think so," he said. "With care." She nodded, more to herself than to him. "I think I needed to see that." "Why?" "Because I was starting to believe some things don't heal." Samuel looked at her then, really looked. "Everything leaves a mark," he said, "but some marks become maps." The words stayed with her as she walked out of the barn with him, her hand brushing the doorway one last time, like she was saying goodbye to something unnamed. Outside, the air was colder than before, but she didn't feel it. Not the same way. The storm came in fast and heavy, turning the earth to mud and the barn into a fortress of wood and silence. Rain hammered the tin roof like a relentless drumbeat. The wind howled through the beams, bending the structure but not breaking it. Inside, 2 folding chairs sat near a hay bale, a lantern flickering between them, casting orange light against the shadows. The horses shuffled in their stalls, uneasy but comforted by the presence of people and warmth. Samuel leaned back in his chair, one boot resting on the rung of the other. Eleanor sat stiffly at first, arms crossed, as if bracing herself not against the storm, but something deeper. Time moved slowly, the kind of slow that doesn't ask for conversation, but eventually demands it. Eleanor broke the silence first. "He died 4 years ago this week," she said. Her voice didn't tremble, but her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve with unconscious grief. "Heart attack, right in our kitchen. One moment he was asking if the coffee was fresh, the next, he wasn't asking anything." Samuel looked at her, eyes steady, listening without interrupting. "I kept making the coffee," she added. "Every morning after. I don't even drink it. I just needed to hear the sound." "You loved him," Samuel said. She nodded. He was quiet, kind. The kind of man who said less but meant more, and I thought losing him would make me stronger. Like I was carrying his memory for both of us. She swallowed, her eyes shining in the low light. "But I think it just made me numb." Samuel reached forward and adjusted the lantern wick, as if giving the flame more space was the same as giving her story room to breathe. "Then you're stronger now," he said, "because you're finally feeling." They sat in silence again, but this time it didn't hurt. Eleanor turned her head slightly. "What about you? You always carry silence like it's a choice." Samuel didn't look away. "My sister. Her name was Maya. She was 16. "What?" "Happened." He took a breath that came from someplace deep. "House fire. I was outside. She wasn't. I ran in anyway. Carried her out, but not soon enough. She made it 2 days in the hospital." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. I stopped speaking to people for a year after that," he said. "Not because I was angry. Just because nothing I could say mattered more than what I didn't save." Her voice was a whisper. "You did save her. You tried. And it wasn't enough." The rain pounded harder for a moment, like the sky was listening too. "I know that feeling," Eleanor said, "of not being enough. I live in a house filled with portraits and books and still feel like a ghost in it. People talk to me like I'm made of glass, but I wasn't always this brittle." Samuel nodded. "You're not brittle. You're tired." She looked over at him, studying the calm in his expression. "How did you stop being numb?" "I didn't," he said. "But I let someone hold part of it with me once, just for a while. That helped." The lantern sputtered slightly, throwing wild shadows on the walls. Eleanor shifted closer, her voice lower now. "Would it help if I held part of yours?" He smiled, not wide, but enough to change the air between them. "It might." They sat like that for a long time, their griefs no longer competing, just existing side by side, like old war stories that didn't need winners. The rain kept falling, but neither of them moved to leave. The barn, for the first time, felt like shelter in more ways than one. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, eyes on the roof. "I don't know what comes next. Maybe it doesn't matter. Right now," Samuel said. "Maybe all that matters is you didn't run tonight." She looked over at him, a faint smile crossing her face. "Neither did you." He tipped his hat slightly. "Some places are worth staying. How's this story hitting you so far? Tell us in the comments. If you're loving it, type 1. If not, type 0. We want to know what you think." The town fair had returned like it always did each spring, bright and loud, and filled with the scent of roasted corn and cinnamon sugar. Flags fluttered from makeshift poles, and children darted between booths, cotton candy melting in their fingers. Eleanor stood at the edge of the crowd, her coat clutched tight against her chest, more out of habit than cold. Her boots were clean, her hair tucked into a soft braid that Claire had insisted on fixing that morning. But her eyes, Those told another story. They followed the man in the corral, the man riding steady, focused, as the sun dipped behind him and lit the arena in gold. Samuel sat tall on a deep brown stallion, legs strong, arms loose but controlled. His hat was pulled low, but even from the stands, she could see the calm in his shoulders, the ease, the purpose. Around her, people cheered and clapped, some shouting names, some just enjoying the race. Eleanor didn't cheer. She couldn't. Her heart was too full, too loud already. She remembered the first fair she came to as a bride. Her husband had won her a stuffed bear and kissed her on the cheek in front of everyone. She had blushed then, full of dreams. And then she remembered last year, standing in the exact same place, hands frozen at her sides, feeling like a body without a pulse. Today was different, fuller. Not because someone replaced what she lost, but because something inside her remembered how to feel again. Claire nudged her shoulder. "You're not blinking!" Eleanor turned. "I'm watching." Claire smiled. "You look happy." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She took a breath, deep and slow. "I feel free." The word sat strange on her tongue, like something she didn't know she was allowed to say. The announcer called out the final lap. Samuel's horse thundered forward, and though he didn't win, he didn't fall behind either. As the race ended and riders began circling back, Eleanor's hands finally unclenched. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been gripping her coat. When Samuel dismounted, he didn't look to the crowd. He looked for her, and he found her. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sky turned lavender, she met him near the stables. The scent of horses and hay and something clean lingered in the air. "I saw you," she said, voice soft. "I saw you seeing me," he replied, brushing dirt from his sleeve. She smiled. "You ride like you've always known where you're going," he shrugged. "Some days, today was one of them." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Why did you come back here, Samuel? Really?" He looked at her, long and true. "Because I thought I was done running. Turns out I was just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to see me. Really see me, not the skin. Not the silence. Just me." Eleanor swallowed hard. "I think I've only just started seeing again. The world went grey for a long time." "I don't mind grey," he said. "It makes the colour more honest when it returns." She smiled again, but this time it reached her eyes. "You know, I never imagined any of this. Not you, not me, not this." "I didn't either," he admitted. "But we're here." She glanced around, the distant lights of the fair flickering like fireflies. "And do you think we deserve—" "I think we've earned the chance to find out." Claire approached then, waving from a few yards away. "Come on," she called. "They're lighting lanterns by the lake." Eleanor looked to Samuel. "Will you come with me?" "I will," he said, then paused. "But only if we walk." She arched a brow. "Is that some cowboy metaphor?" He grinned. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like walking beside you." They didn't rush. They didn't hold hands. Not yet. But their footsteps matched, and their silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with history, with hurt, with something growing that neither of them wanted to name just yet. Not because they were afraid, but because sometimes the most sacred things aren't spoken. They're simply felt. As they reached the edge of the lake, Eleanor turned to him, her face glowing in the lantern light. "You never tried to fix me, Samuel?" "I couldn't," he said. "You weren't broken." She nodded slowly. "But I was lost." "And you found your own way," he said. "I just waited nearby." She looked at him then, her voice barely a whisper. "You never needed to save me, did you?" Samuel took her hand just for a moment. "You never needed saving. You just needed someone to wait with you." The porch creaked beneath their boots as they stepped outside, the sun just beginning to rise over the distant hills. Dew sparkled like tiny diamonds on the ranch grass, the air cool but soft, the breeze nudging the wind chimes into a gentle clatter. Samuel held a coffee mug in one hand, the other tucked loosely in his pocket. Eleanor sat beside him, her feet bare, a light shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was still damp from her morning rinse, tucked behind her ears in a way that used to feel careless but now felt free. The porch swing groaned as she leaned back into it. This was their first morning like this, side by side, silent without being distant. She stared out across the ranch. The horses were still asleep. The day hadn't begun yet, but she had. She didn't feel like a widow today, not really. She felt like someone whose soul had been wrung out and handed back with warmth, like someone who had finally exhaled after years of holding her breath. "I thought healing would hurt more," she said, her voice light. Samuel didn't look at her. He just sipped his coffee and answered, "It did, until you smiled." She turned toward him, watching the way his eyes crinkled just slightly at the corners, the way his jaw held steady even when he was still. "You always speak like you've known the ending before the first page." "I just read carefully," he replied, nodding toward the field. They sat like that for a while. No questions, no rushing, just space filled with peace. "I used to dread mornings," she admitted. The silence, the reminders, the fact that everything kept moving without him. "And now?" Samuel asked. "I still wake up early, still think of him, but now I don't feel like I'm betraying him by breathing. That's what grief does," he said. "It doesn't leave, it just changes shape." She looked down at her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "And you, Samuel? What does this morning feel like to you?" He let the question sit before answering. "Like I was meant to ride through here, just long enough to see you come back to life." She chuckled softly. "That sounds poetic. I've been known to surprise people." She bumped her shoulder gently into his. "Well, you surprised me." He met her gaze. "You surprised yourself." They didn't need grand declarations. No promises, no titles, just a mutual understanding. That something had shifted and that they both had a choice now. To step forward or to retreat. And they both knew what they would choose. Eleanor finished the last sip of her coffee and leaned, her head briefly against his shoulder. "Do you think people ever stop being afraid of losing again?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think we stop letting that fear keep us from living." The sun pushed up fully now, lighting the fields, kissing the tops of the trees and stretching shadows across the dirt path that led to the barn. A new day, one without weight, only rhythm. As they stood, Eleanor took one last look at the porch swing, the horizon, the moment. "Thank you for waiting," she whispered. Samuel touched the brim of his hat. "Thank you for coming back." They walked toward the barn. Together, no ceremony, no applause, just the sound of two hearts finally finding a rhythm that didn't hurt.